But at the shoulder here, she has like 60%. It's big. I got hit.
I brought notes. I was gonna make some points, things to remind me of things, and then I went, there was nothing there. I really appreciate it, all of you, and all the years that all of you have known Dave, who worked with with the Fish and Wildlife Service, with the Land Trust. We've got neighbors here that I really, really appreciate you coming, and I did make a couple of notes, but I found something. I don't know if all of you know what a poet he was. Kind of kept that to himself. And I was going to bring some cards, and I looked at him and I couldn't bring him, because he always made a birthday card and he always wrote a really nice note. And there's just one short one over there that he tried to copy on the copy machine because he couldn't shop for cards anymore. And it kind of got twisted and backwards, but that's okay. Dave's birthday was Saturday, or no, his birthday was Thursday, and my birthday was Saturday. And this is the first time in probably over 60 years that we didn't spend our birthdays together. And I really miss him. I miss him a lot. And I know that time helps. But I saw something that I was going to read. This really wasn't my notes, sort of yes, sort of no. But the bullet points just disappeared. And I saw this and it's appropriate. I'm going to read it. It says, missing someone isn't about how long it has been since you've seen them or the amount of time since you've talked. It's about that very moment when you're doing something and wishing they were there with you. And I'm kind of there right now. I'll miss him a lot. He was a big personality, a big man with a big personality. But I was always so proud of him, of what he did and what he accomplished. And I can look out there and see all of you who knew him. I think you'll all kind of agree. So Molly is our daughter, and Molly has a little something that she's going to read that he wrote. We just found it as we're starting to go through some of his paperwork. We all cried when we read it. And this was 2 or 3 years ago. And then Dan, our son, has a little something that he wrote. And then nothing's going to be real long. And then Dan's girlfriend is going to read something about the thorax. Really short, but I think you'll all understand. Especially those of you who work and really need it. So Molly, please, and then come up and read your, unless you've memorized it. No. So you come up and I'm going to sit down and first you're going to go.
I got them, then I have a little picture. Oh,
It's a fall moon.
of the subject matter of the story. The little white dogs, it just moved right into his heart. We're not quite sure when Dad wrote this. I just came across it recently, and I thought that, I know you all knew Dad professionally, but many of you probably don't know that he was an artist, and he could draw and he could paint, and he had a really good writing style, and he was good with words. And so after Peyton passed, Peyton, the little white dog, after he passed of old age, at some point, Dad wrote this little ode to the sweet little white dog, and he called it Peyton's Place, and I'm going to share it with you. At the top of the peak of the highest mountain in heaven, the omnipotent Creator sat, pleased while surveying all of creation. But the Creator sensed something was missing. The Creator realized the need for a lovable little dog to bring joy to all he met, so Peyton was born. He grew into everybody's friend for nearly 17 years of his earthly life, bringing profound happiness to his mommy and to those he subsequently met. The playful Peyton would forever chase and bite water from the garden hose and chase the tennis ball down the hall until happily exhausted. He kept the mailman and the big brown truck at a distance, but as the years went by, Father Time burdened Peyton with many physical infirmities, including debilitating arthritis, foggy eyesight, sorry about this one, urinary problems, several bad teeth, and hearing loss. With this overwhelming loss of quality of life, Father Time called St. Peter to open heaven's pearly gates and let the little white dog pass into eternal good health and forever happy times, waiting for his mommy and all his many friends that he met during his earthly life. In the meantime, Peyton will live in the hearts of all his many friends and to all of those who loved him. See you again someday, puppy. Love you, big hugs and kisses, Grandpa Dave. Thank you, everyone.
Short paragraph. And some of this is of personal nature, but it's okay if people wonder. I always thought we Hudaks were a small family, and we are in Indiana. But I had to rewrite this because after seeing this family, we're a family with deep roots and strong branches. So on a personal note, Dad's last recognizable words were something like walnut or walnut woods. So people wonder, and so Dad's ashes will be in what we call the walnut woods on his family farm where he grew up. So with Dad there, he'll still be strengthening the deep roots and the strong branches. And we have other family members there too, so we won't be alone. So that's all I have today.
I'm sure everyone has read the Lorax. I didn't know this until recently, when I haven't known David Mary that long, I've known Dan a lot longer. He had strong ties to Jim Davis with some of the forestry that he helped with that. And so Ed Perry, one of the illustrators, wrote this to Dave. December 19th, 2016. Dear Dave, 40 years ago, I was selected to take special training in the Clean Water Act, which had just been passed 3 years earlier. An attorney from the Southern Environmental Law Center gave a riveting talk on how we had a mission to fulfill and that we now had a law to protect the nation's water to back us up. He gave us all a copy of the recently published Lorax, and in quite an emotional voice said, "You are the Lorax. There is no one else who will speak for the trees." I never forgot that. I've kept track of your career and watched you, as you have gone all in to protect our nation's wildlife heritage. If Dr. Seuss did not pattern his book after you, he should have, because you could have been the original Lorax. I have been in the fight to protect our nation's outdoor heritage for over 40 years now, and it has always been a great comfort to me to know that I had worked in the trenches with someone so dedicated. And so I am passing on this copy of the Lorax to you. Someone took my original copy of the Lorax, so this will have to do. There is a hefty charge that taking possession of this imposes on you, but you were in a position to speak for the resources that could not speak for itself. And the heavy burden that you carried, you fulfilled admirably. I am grateful for your friendship and am proud to have been part of the effort that those of us who were in the Save the Dirt plan carried out for so many years. We were lucky we didn't get fired. With great admiration and affection, Ed Perry.
Jill, what are yours?
Hi, I'm Bill McCoy, a close friend of Dave for many years, and so appreciative of all the things that he was able to do in his time here in Indiana and back in Ohio. I have two quotes that I want to quote. They're short. To me, they speak well of Dave and the way he conducted business. First quote from Dr. Seuss. I've heard there are troubles of more than one kind. Some come from ahead and some come from behind. But I've brought a big bag. I'm already, you see, now my troubles are going to have troubles with me. And when it came to protecting the environment, it says it all. Second one, behold the turtle. He makes progress only when he sticks his neck out. Believe me, Dave stuck his neck out. He was somebody you could always depend on. If you got in a tight spot, Dave was there for you. He was in the foxhole right there. I first met Dave in 1990. I was in Oklahoma, Wichita Mountains Refuge, and I applied for this job in southern Indiana, Paducah, and I'd never been here before, didn't know much about it, but it sure sounded interesting. I was interested in the job because it was a new refuge. Nothing was here, no land, no staff. And so I got selected for the job. And then, like February, then in March, I got a phone call from the regional office and they said, we got a problem. The refuge has been disestablished, but we still want you to come. And I said, well, I've got a couple kids in school, and I said, I'd like some kind of commitment on that. And they said, we'll send you a letter saying we'll fund you for 2 years. We want you to write an environmental impact statement. So we agreed to come. My wife Valerie here and 2 sons at the time. And first meeting I had with Dave was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And we met. He flew in, I flew in. We met at the Office of Surface Mining in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to talk about the problem at Paducah. And that problem was the takings of coal rights. Once, according to the Surface Mining Act, once you establish a boundary of a refuge, all the laws apply to that refuge, even though you don't own any land. And so there were 23,000 acres in a major coal mining area in southern Indiana that we just basically put off limits to coal mining. And we had to figure that out. That was my number one problem. And it took us 4 years. We figured it out. We came up with the Paducah River National Wildlife Refuge and Wildlife Management Area. And it was all semantics. The Wildlife Management Area, pleaded with our solicitor, it's not a refuge. And so the Surface Mining Act doesn't apply. We don't take the coal rights until we buy the land, and we won't buy the land if we can't get the coal rights. And they approved that. And that was the preferred alternative, and that's what allowed the Paducah River to proceed starting in 1994. But there was a long history before that. And some of the folks that are going to come up here are going to touch on that history going back into the early 80s. When Dave was behind it all. Dave came to Indiana in 78. By 82, he was the main driving force to create the Paducah Wildlife Refuge. And today we have 11,000 acres bought from Williams Up. And we have a long way to go, but it's on its way. And it's all because of Dave. Interesting thing, I read an article over there on commitment, or an award that they gave Dave, and it had to do with his degree of assistance since the project inception in late 1985 of the Paducah Wildlife Refuge, well beyond the normal scope of activities for an ecological services field. And that's where Dave really stood out. You know, there were ecological services obviously has very specific functions that they carry out. What Dave did was stepped outside of that function and would grab a hold of a project like Paducah River, Kankakee, Big Oaks. He was right there front and center, college meetings, hearings, talking to politicians. He helped make all these things happen. He didn't have to do that. That was his choice. And that's what made Dave so unique in the field of conservation. Okay, I'm going to stop with that. And what I'd like to do is ask individuals, we've asked individuals that have a history with Dave, if they would be interested in coming up and telling us a short story about their experience. So I'm just, this is a random list, but we have about 9 more people on that list. That's something. I don't want to speak anymore. How about if we start with Dave Howe? Dave, I'll let him introduce himself. He goes way back further than me.
Thanks, Bill. Dave Howell, at that time, 40 years ago in the 70s and 80s, I was a district wildlife biologist with the Indiana Division of Fish and Wildlife. In fact, I got a phone call from Dave in 1982, and he wanted to meet with me. Well, I had been a biologist for 10 years, about 10 years at that time. Of course, I enjoyed the wilds, and I live in southwest Indiana. That's where I was a district biologist, and was very familiar with the Patoka River and a lot of the wildland down there. And some of the land as the Patoka River moved to the west in the Oatsville Bottoms area and that. So I said, sure. It's hard for me to believe that was 42 years ago. I was building my home, and Dave said, I just need to meet you. I said, okay, how about such and such a time, late afternoon, I'll be at this place. And he met me, had an armful of maps, spread them out. We didn't even have a table. He spread these maps out on the floor. We looked at them. We talked about different parts of the Patoka River and what that might mean and the benefits from a wildlife or ecological standpoint. Went over things. He asked me about different people and organizations in a particular area, talked about that. And I thought, is this guy for real? There's a lot of things here, hoops that have to be jumped through, as many of you are sure, or I'm sure you know, to do something like this. And you heard Bill allude to some of what had went on later on. And sure enough, he was, and more than that. He did a wonderful job in getting things going on the Patoka River National Wildlife Refuge. This was in 82 when I met with him. As Bill said, it was 94 before the first land was purchased. But again, all the hoops and the work that had to be done, Dave was there, persistent, excellent, and it got done. And today, we're very fortunate because, as Bill just mentioned, more ground will be secured in the future, and future generations will benefit from Dave's attitude towards saving the land. Thank you.
There was another cohort at that time that was meeting with Dave and Dave, and that's Bob Dodd. Bob Dodd is here with us today. He ended up being the ability assistant manager.
Yeah, Bob Dodd is my name. I retired as a wildlife biologist here at the Patoka Refuge. And I met Dave, it was in the early 80s. I can't remember exactly because at the time, we were raising feeder pigs to supplement my extravagant government check. But I was stationed in southern Indiana, kind of a combined station with fisheries biologists and wildlife biologists. And when I met Dave, as Dave Hudak, my mind, which doesn't work like most people, the hogs we were raising were Durocs. And I got Hudak and Duroc. So from then on, it just sort of became a joke about me. He said, how you doing, Don? I'm fine, Duroc, how are you? And he had a great sense of humor, which I'm thankful for, because you can see I'm not a very big guy. Dave was a very big guy. And I often thought if he got upset about that, he could have pounded me in the ground, like a kid. But we had, and once, like Dave was saying just a minute ago, we spent most of our time together either at the kitchen table with topographic maps or county plat books and time out looking at the various types of habitat. But it was a pleasure to be with him. He was a genuinely nice guy. And he was a friend.
There's a big project here, it took many years to accomplish, and I-69. And, it was kind of a competing project with the Patoka Wildlife Refuge. Some of the opponents of the refuge tried to use the refuge to gain opposition to the refuge by saying we were going to stop I-69. So it's absolutely critical. And this, Dave, again, played a very important part in that, coordinating with NDOT and Bernard Lockdiller, the environmental planners for I-69. Today, we have Tom Cervone, who was in charge of that environmental program for I-69, worked really close with Dave and addressed so many of the mitigation issues that needed to be addressed. Like, we got the longest bridge in Indiana that crosses the entire, not just the floodway, but the floodplain of the Patoka River. Almost a mile long, most long Verrazano Bridge in New York. And not to mention the move of 500 acres of mitigation. But Tom Cervone is here today, and he would like to say a few words about his experience with working with Dave.
Thank you, Bill. I came to Indiana from Pennsylvania in 1984, and I was an academic professor for 3 years. I thought I always would be a teacher, a professor. But then my 3-year contract came up, and it was over. I got a call from a firm, Bernard Lockdiller and Associates, and being a field biologist, they had some work for me. And guess what job they had? I-69. So I started I-69, and I got a chance to meet many people that were just great people, from NDOT, Federal Highway, as well as the regulatory agencies. And I think I had met Dave in the 80s because I was a big theologist. I liked fish. And the Patoka River really needed some help learning about the fishes. So Dr. Tom Simon and I, another gentleman, we worked on the fishes of the Patoka River, got to know him then. But when I first really learned about Dave is when we had a meeting in Bloomington, and he was heading that particular field station. NDOT wanted to talk to Dave about I-69. So a gentleman by the name of Jay Marks from NDOT and Dave Hudak, both big gentlemen, and I'm in the middle, and they're both sizing each of them up, you know. Are you telling the truth? Are you telling the truth? You know, who's genuine, who's not? And you know, in that one meeting, Dave accepted Jay as telling the truth. Because when you're in regulatory agencies, sometimes people try to pull the wool over you, you know, and not always honest with you. But Dave looked at Jay, and Jay looked at Dave. And they built a relationship. Now, why is that important? It's important because Dave also knew all these other regulatory agencies, and they looked towards him as to his credentials, and if he accepts someone, they're going to accept them. So for I-69, we were blessed to have NDOT, Federal Highway, and the regulatory agencies work together, and essentially I was the bridge. They both trusted me, and we did things that we probably would not have gotten done. And who started them? It was Dave. In his quiet, mild-mannered way, You know, he might have held a club for some people, but I never saw that. He was a gentle-hearted person that believed in doing the right thing for the right reason. And he looked for, like what I did, win-win situations, where the people win, the environment wins, and society wins. What's something of where everybody wins? And he looked into all that. So he was instrumental in not only I-69, but Goose Pond, I worked with him on that too. I want to go back to I-69, something that's very, very important. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service with Dave and Bill, maybe others, thought ahead so that in their environmental document that would be finalized, they actually had on page, I think it was 93, a picture of a portion of the Patoka River National Wildlife Refuge that they're holding open for, guess what? They're reserving it for I-69. That's how far Dave and Bill and some other people thought that if this road is truly important, let's look at some place where we agree that we can accept a crossing, not of the floodway, but of the floodplain. And get it up high and keep a wildlife corridor under it. See, so Dave's mind was always thinking. And I thought he was a leader. And I just so much enjoyed being with him. Because I can believe in a person that wants to do the right things. And maybe sometimes the right thing superiors may not agree with. And you'll get some backlash. And Dave got that too, I'm sure. But the one thing Dave was never called is a yes man. He was a good man. And in my position in the church, I hold many prayer services, memorial services, vigil services. The one good thing you can always say about a man is he was a good man. So we're going to miss him terribly because he was a wonderful example for people like me, and I'm sure so many of you. And we just were so blessed to have him when he was with you. But it is my belief that he is still with us. And the things that he taught us, we still remember and that we will carry on. And another thing, and then I'll leave with this. Some of you may not know that September 1st starts a season, and it's called the Season of Creation. And it runs all the way through to October 4th. Who better than Dave Hudak to talk about in regards to creation? Because he protected creation. He protected nature. He protected the people and their environments. And he took it serious. So I love the man. And I just want to extend our condolences to the family and all the friends. His legacy will carry on and on and on, because I certainly will still say what a wonderful man he was, and all the wonderful things I learned from him. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Next. Greg McCormick. Greg, farmer in Knox County. Probably one of the top conservation farmers.
Thanks for calling me a farmer. When I met Dave, they called me a hillbilly. Dave kind of inverted me into a farmer and conservationist. So So I want to tell you about the first time I ever saw Dave Hudak. So my friends had said there's this meeting in Petersburg about a national wildlife refuge. You want to go? I didn't know anything about it, but I said, let's go. So we go to the auditorium in Petersburg, and right up in the center table up there is Dave Hudak sitting there. And so they were asking people to come up and comment, and of course everybody's just laying into them as hard as they can go. And one thing stuck in my mind was about a gentleman that got up there and said, let me tell you about the Atoka Bottoms. I saw the DNR flying over in helicopters and dropping beavers in there. And I kind of, things stick in your mind. First seeing Dave Hudak for the first time, and then this guy standing up and talking about dumping beavers out of helicopters. After years of going over on meetings on the refuge, I realized he'd probably spent several hours at the Bob Inn in Winslow. So I understood the culture. But I decided to get up as a farmer and say a few things positive about protecting natural resources. And that's how Dave and I first connected. Then after that, I nominated myself because Successful Farming Magazine was looking for the best farmer in the United States for migratory birds. It was called Farming in the Flyways. And so I made a video and wrote a paper and sent it in to John Walters, the editor of Successful Farming Magazine. And he said he literally almost cried when he saw it. So he called the local USDA office. If you want to tell me to shut up and sit down, happens all the time at drainage board meetings, so that's okay. But he calls the local USDA office, the NRCS office, and their reply was, he says, what about making this guy the national award winner for this contest? And they said, if you make him the national award winner, people will burn your magazine. So that gives you kind of an idea of what farmers thought of wetland protection at that point. So he was gonna not make me the winner. But he decided, I'll call Dave Hudak, this guy named Dave Hudak in Indiana. So John Walters called him, and of course Dave said, really? You have this farmer that's taking all the grief. He's getting this pushback from farmers. Who do you want to win? Somebody that's doing this while in that environment, or do you want to have somebody that's not pushing the elements on wetlands protection? And so they made me the national award winner because of Dave Hudak. And the reason I like to bring it back, because that's back when I had red hair. Kind of red now, but I've been out in the sun too much. But Dave got me to be the national award winner, which got me to Washington, D.C., which got me a meeting with Richard Lugar on wetlands protection, got me many trips there. And it was really a springboard into my conservation career, that call to Dave Hudak. By the way, on the opposite page is George Bush Sr. saying no net loss of wetlands. That was pretty strong from a Republican in those days. So I've been going around Washington, D.C., and they had invited me to go to a no net loss of wetlands in Peoria, Illinois. So I was going to get in front of the press and everybody and speak. And then the day before I'm supposed to leave, I was going to leave that day and go over to Peoria. Dave calls me. He says, Ray, you've been taken off the list. I went, oh, well, I guess I won't go. So a few hours later, he goes, I don't know what's going on, but the White House called, you're back on the list. So off to Peoria, Illinois I went. And the significance of that is when I was there, Dean Kleckner was sitting next to me, the American president of the Farm Bureau. So he gets up there and says, I have 7 scientific evidence that none of these things, and he named them all about wetlands, water storage and wildlife. He says, I have proof that none of that is true. And so he steps down and all the farm girls give him a standing ovation. So a big bunch of the crowd in this big room give him a standing ovation. Off went my talk. And I get up there and I said, I don't know where you were raised, but I was raised on a farm with wetland, and everything you said is not true. And I proceeded to really lay into it. So when I finished, the rest of the crowd stood up and gave me a standing ovation. So Dave Hudak got me in front of these Washington, D.C. people wanting to promote no that loss of weapons. So Dave helped me in that. The last thing, and I'll put this hat on, Bill, it may be the last one of this. Friends of the Hudak National Wildlife Refuge. So then I spent years, 6 years on the Hudak, then came along the goose pond. And so we're working on the goose pond, and you can imagine what that was like. They've been trying since the Korean War for the goose pond. And as we were getting it in the press and looking at it, proposing it and so forth, they were having a meeting on it in Linton, Indiana, at the park there in Linton. And I thought, it's sort of an opposition meeting, you know, and I thought, well, I'll go in and slide in the back. I've been picking corn, all dirty and greasy and everything. I'll be able to slide in there and nobody will know that I'm for it. You know? So I go in there and I sit down. Well, there's Dave Hudak sitting there in the back too. So I sit down next to Dave Hudak. So they're getting up there one at a time, and this is a communistic conspiracy, and the mosquitoes are going, and they're just loading it on as heavy as they can go. And the crowd's getting more and more agitated, and they're giving Harry Dockstetter hell, and he's about to turn tail and run. And they said, you know, he'd say, I can't answer that. I don't know. I can't answer that. And this guy in front says, I know who can answer it. Dave Hudak, he's right back there. And the whole crowd turns around like this. And I'm like, so that was one of my many experiences with Dave Hudak sitting in the back of the crowd at an opposition meeting to the goose pond. The goose pond ended up happening, and Dave was part of it too. You know, Dave will never die, because people that do what we do and what he did, the habitat we put on the land, the trees, the wetlands, the prairies, all of that lives on forever. Many of it is Hudak National Wildlife Refuge or the Goose Pond. Many of them are conservation easements. So in 300 years, that land will still be there. So all of us have a chance to have our legacy live on in the land. So Dave will always be there. Now there's a guy that says, make America great again. Well, Donald Trump, you're no Dave Hudak.
Pretty obvious. Dave had a big influence on a lot of people. Christian, could you come up? Christian Project, former executive director with the Sycamore Land Trust. Now he's the director of the Conservation Law Center at IU. And he had lots of work with Dave.
I did. I appreciate the chance to talk to folks. Dave was a good friend, and I appreciate seeing so many people that I've done so much work with for 30 years now. And people like Bill McCoy, people like Ray McCormick, I've known these folks a long time. Jeff Keeper's here, just retired. Congratulations. But Ray said a really interesting thing just now, and I didn't expect that, but Dave will never die. That's a really important thing. I mean, the way that you think about conservation. By the way, my name is Christian Freitag. I run Conservation Law Center. Dave and I work together. I was the first employee hired at Sycamore Land Trust. I guess I should start by introducing myself a little bit. I won't speak long, that's for sure. Sycamore Land Trust was 10 years old by the time I came around, and I was a graduate student. I needed a part-time job, and so environmental lawyer. I needed a part-time job, and they needed a part-time employee. And Dave Hudak had been in the room when Tom Zeller and Mara Wedekind and Mel Childs and those folks got together for the first meetings of Sycamore Land Trust to like dream up a thing that might. They had been involved with the Sassafras Audubon Society and decided, that's a pretty neat thing. Joe Tentler's here also. I want to make sure I mention that. That's a pretty neat thing that we're into birds, but why don't we go save some land? And they created Sycamore Land Trust. And for 10 years, they saved about 500 acres, and it was an amazing thing. Dave Hudak was nothing if not a visionary. And I came around, I was just a little whippersnapper kid, needed a part-time job, like I said, when I was in graduate school. And it became clear to me immediately that the recipe for what Sycamore Land Trust did was, we were just scratching the surface of what we were going to do. Dave Hudak was tapping into the heart of Southern Indiana. I mean, people like Dave Hudak, Dave and other people in the room, people in Southern Indiana, for all their quirkiness, I'm not including myself, I will say, but for all of our quirky habits, we care about the land. One way or the other, we really, really care about the land. And Dave was plugged into that long before I came around. I learned a lot from him, and that's the few comments that I'd like to make would be about Dave as a teacher to me. When I met Dave, I was probably 24 years old, probably 24 years old, 25 years old. I'm 51 years old now. I've known Dave a long time. But Dave was a teacher to me, and our stories are connected in a lot of ways. I feel like whatever successes I've had, and I'll count them as small successes, but they happened because I was able to learn from people like Dave. And that's been important. I guess I'll say a few things about the things that I learned from Dave, but I feel like I'll be remiss if I don't say what my wife thinks is important, is that Dave had an amazing head of hair. His shock of white hair was just epic. So I'm going to start with that. I know that's silly, but she said, I hope somebody says something about Dave's hair. So I'll be the guy that says something about Dave's hair. It was awesome. Let's just start with that. But beyond that, and more seriously, Dave could sit in people's living room, and his trust came so quickly. I would go with Dave on trips to weirdo little towns on Stumphole Bridge Road in Lawrence County to go talk to somebody about their 100 acres. And we'd sit in their living room and eat their kind of gross soup and kind of gross coffee. And, the things that we've eaten for conservation is a book that we've always talked about writing together. But people trusted him almost immediately. I mean, because he was genuine. Like, there was no baloney to it. He wasn't selling you anything. He wasn't trying to convince you of something. At least you didn't feel that way. I mean, he was trying to convince you of something, almost always. I mean, he was trying to convince you that your land was worth more than dollars. It was worth something in your heart. But people didn't feel like they were getting a bill of goods. They felt like he was genuine because he was genuine. And boy, I learned a lot about that. Not everybody can pull that off. Not everybody can sit in somebody's living room and tell somebody you ought to reduce the value of your land by half because you care about birds. That's a real cool thing to be able to do. And boy, I hope I learned a lot about that. But his honesty and his feeling were genuine, and that was important. He only gave me a few pieces of direct advice. I mean, I soaked up, like most of us, we soaked up a lot of advice from him indirectly, but he only gave me a few direct pieces of advice. One was, boy, I think he did say boy. He was like, boy, you better get a thick skin. And because there are going to be people, as the stories you've heard, and you go stand and you go preaching conservation in southern Indiana, it's not always a friendly room. So you're gonna catch a little hell along the way. And sometimes even inside your own organization, whether it's your nonprofit or your government agency or wherever you're working, he said you're gonna catch some. So you better get a thick skin about you. And that is something that we can all take to heart. I really certainly did myself. And another one, for years he had a bumper sticker on his car. It said "Slow down." It was something like "Slow down for wildlife." I mean, I can't remember exactly what it said, but the gist of it was "Slow down for wildlife," which, but he told me, I said, "That's a pretty cool bumper sticker, Dave." And he told me, "Yeah, slow down for wildlife." He's like, "Man, there's a lot of lessons to be learned in just slowing down." I mean, I asked him specifically about like slow down for wildlife. That's pretty neat. He said, "Yeah, that's pretty neat." But the advice that he gave me was learning how to slow down was more about wildlife. It was beyond just wildlife. It was like a way of life, a way of looking at the world. And that certainly extended to wildlife, but for him it extended beyond that. So have a thick skin and slow down. I talked to Jeff. I don't know if Jeff's going to say anything, but in case he doesn't, I talked to him the other day at his retirement party, drinking a beer together. And, he reminded me how good of a biologist Dave was. Like, I saw Dave as a sort of a leader and an organizer of people and a friend and a guide in my life, but I never really knew him as a biologist. I mean, I never really knew him as like a practicing biologist to tell you, like, here's where the critters need the thing that they need. And I think they should, I hope we don't forget about the quality of his craftsmanship. Most importantly for me, and this is the last thing I'll say, he cared about the land more than anybody I know. Save the Dirt was real. I take that to heart.
Thank you, Christian. John, how about we follow that up with something like?
We'll do our best. I knew you were gonna call me after Christian. I knew it was gonna be a.
John took Christian's place as executive director of Sycamore Land Trust, and he's been doing a super job.
Oh, thank you. Well, standing on the shoulders of giants, may have been here today. Yeah, gosh. Speaking, Dave, great head of hair, known as mentioned, his great voice, and I wish I could do it justice. I was practicing it the other day because I also learned a lot from Dave. I didn't work with him quite as closely as Christian did, but I got to talk to him a lot over the years, and a lot of times because he would call up, in the early days of Sycamore, he was Mr. Land Acquisition, and as a volunteer, of course. And our files are just stuffed full of pages and pages of his handwritten notes on unlined paper for whatever reason, and some of them are a little hard to read, but it just shows you how much time and care he put into finding land and talking with people to save the dirt. And he would always a treat when the phone would ring, and I can't do the voice, but you can hear it in your head to then pick up the phone and, "Hey, John, old Hudak here, the old bear." So it's like the nothing mentioned that. He called himself the old bear, which is very appropriate, big burly, bear-like guy. And then the conversation would always something I'd learned from, because he would be calling out, "Oh, hey, John, I was thinking about that Smith place, me and Terry, or me and John, or me and Christian, we met with them 10 years ago, and I just, he saw something in the newspaper or someone passed away, and he was thinking about it, because every person he talked to, every land he visited about Sycamore, he had in his mind, and it stuck with him, and some of those projects came back around over the years. Talking about Christian saying, learning his style and just being genuine with people. And I just, silly story, but it amuses me, it amuses Christian, so hopefully it'll amuse the rest of you just a little bit. It was a big thrill to me in my formative years at Sycamore. I started as a part-time office person, a recent graduate and from IU, and wanted to get my foot in the door somewhere, and fortunately something came up at Sycamore, and it was a big thrill. I felt like getting called up to the big leagues when Christian said one day that I was invited to go with him and Dave Hudak to go visit a property and meet the landowners and talk with them. And I'm sure I learned a lot that day about talking with folks, but what I really remember was that it was went in the afternoon. Christian and I had been working all day, and it just be 5:30, and we had a nice visit with the landowners and everything. And but it was time to go. Frankly, Christian and I were kind of tired, a little bit hungry. But so we were getting ready to leave, but then something caught the old bear's eye, and that was a persimmon tree, just dripping with persimmons. And in a very bear-like way, you could just kind of imagine this old bear scratching and sniffing around under this tree, trying to figure out how he's going to get, because all the persimmons on the ground weren't any good. And frankly, Christian and I were kind of like, have dinner here, Dave. And so we had to go through quite an effort to find a persimmon catching device. We were short on boxes, bags. None of us wore a hat that day, but our friendly landowner finally, Christian, I think she went in and managed to get like a big straw hat. I don't remember, probably Christian and I were in charge of shaking the tree while Dave was catching his persimmons. But the old bear finally got his persimmons and went home satisfied. So that was a fun little story. And yeah, just really great to get to know him over the years and talk about various projects. And it's wonderful. Back on the back, I think it's just a lovely picture of Dave. It's just he's a handsome guy, and he's just standing there, looking handsome next to the original sign at Pink Blossom Bottoms at the Habitat for Herons, which has grown from the first 80 acres to over 700 acres, and they've had so much to do with that. And of course, it also joins. Speaking of Dave being sort of a force of nature and not letting things go, he and the indomitable Barbara Vestal convinced the Muscatatuck Refuge to take 80 acres in Monroe County that is right an hour and a half away from the refuge, but my gosh, they got it done. And now, that's part of this overall complex. So save the dirt. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Dave's work, he dealt with a lot of environmental problems, any of the environmental problems in Indiana. And there was one group, the Hoosier Environmental Council, that was always on top of environmental issues. And today we have Tim Maloney. We have Tim. There he is. Tim and Dave worked closely together for years on many different projects that were great importance to protecting the environment. Tim is now retired, and we're glad to see you here. And Tim was also a big help on the Hudak Wildlife Refuge, getting that spot.
Bill. Well, I appreciate being asked to make a few comments about Dave. As Bill said, I'm recently retired from the Hoosier Environmental Council, and as an environmental advocacy organization, we were involved in a lot of the both land conservation, natural resource policy issues, environmental quality issues across the state. So we crossed paths with the Fish and Wildlife Service quite a bit. And up to that point in my work at HEC, a lot of our work with agencies, principally the Forest Service and some state agencies, were adversarial in nature. And when I first interacted with Dave and the folks, the great crew that he had at the Bloomington field office, it was just a breath of fresh air in terms of his approach to the work, his obvious passion and commitment to protecting Indiana's land and wildlife and natural resources. And just his straight ahead, no nonsense nature was such a welcome experience after having some different types of experiences with agency people and elected officials who were all about destroying Indiana's natural heritage rather than protecting it. So that always stood with me over the years, and like many of the other people that have spoken, I've learned so much from Dave about how to manage the world of environmental policy and the many conflicts and problems and disputes that arise in that, yet the value of being straightforward, yet caring about people and treating people fairly and with respect, that were just great, not only life lessons, but professional lessons for me, given that when I started with HEC, I was still very young and not very experienced in this work. So I really treasured those interactions and that advice. I think about one of the times that, well, at HEC, like I said, we had our disputes and clashes with agencies. We also, on occasion, clashed with our colleagues in the conservation and environmental arena, where HEC was often perceived as the tree huggers, the liberal tree huggers, and then there were the traditional hook and bullet type groups. And so we had our clashes there. But one time I sat down in a meeting with Dave and maybe a half dozen other conservation and environmental group representatives, including some of those folks that we clashed with, and he was just very persuasive and emphatic about the need to, where you have agreement on conservation outcomes, to work together no matter that you have those areas of disagreement as well. And we heard the speech about saving the dirt, one of Dave's favorite lectures, saving the dirt. But he was really on point about that. And I just want to say, I hope everybody realizes the many such critically important conservation causes that Dave and his colleagues at the Bloomington field office were involved with, the outcomes that made such a difference in Indiana, like the Patoka River National Wildlife Refuge and the Goose Pond and the Big Oaks National Wildlife Refuge in southeast Indiana that our organization played a role in as well. Dave really left his mark in so many ways, and later on with Sycamore, after he left Fish and Wildlife Service, that we should all honor that life's work that he did in Indiana as really one of Indiana's greatest conservationists. So I greatly admire Dave, and I really am honored to have known him and worked with him. And know that I hope he's out there enjoying the wild waters somewhere now. Thanks.
Thank you, Tim. Okay, we have two left. Joe Robb, the manager at the Big Oaks National Wildlife Refuge. And Joe worked closely with Dave at times, again, getting that refuge established. And, welcome.
Thanks. Well, a lot of the speakers today are heroes of mine. So, and Dave Hudak is a hero of mine as well. He was the reason that I came back to Indiana. Steve Miller and I were both hired basically because of Dave's efforts. Jefferson Proving Ground, if you're aware, was a munition testing site in southeast Indiana before World War II. It started before Pearl Harbor, because the country thought that there was war coming, and they used that site to test and did a great job at that. But Dave was a real proponent of that site, and he fought against some internal Fish and Wildlife Service who did not agree with that. And so it was on and off again, on and off again. The Army was ready for Fish and Wildlife Service to take over. It was called off, and it was back and forth. Well, Dave was at a meeting with the Secretary of the Army was there, and Dave was off to the side, and Dave saw an opportunity, and he rushed up to the Secretary of the Army, and the security folks around the Army kind of saw this big barrel of a guy running up to him, and they were going to tackle him and put him down. And in Dave's way, he talked to him very quickly, and they kind of went off the side and started talking, and Dave had this great ability to get rapport really fast and trust. And in that brief meeting, he got the Secretary of Army to agree to like $750,000 to put aside for the Fish and Wildlife Service to do these studies at that location. And that was some of the money that Steve Miller and I was hired. And because of that, we worked through some of the issues. And one of the first jobs I was to write legislation to turn that property over to Fish and Wildlife Service. Because of Brother Circle, all these crazy acronyms that Dave really didn't care about so much to get save dirt, but we found a way to do that. And the stories that you hear of his passion to saving the dirt will carry on because of these places that he was able to save. And we'll continue on. Thank you. Okay, Jeff Kiefer. Jeff is the recent retiree from the Bloomington Ecological Services field office. And I guess Dave hired you, didn't he?
Did?
Yeah. So, another expert on Dave. So,
Thanks, Bill. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Kiefer. I'm recently retired as of last Friday with 32 years of Fish and Wildlife Service, all here in Indiana, in the Bloomington office. I'm actually part of the Indiana Private Lands Office, which is kind of a separate office from the Bloomington Ecological Services office. And I first met Dave probably when, I'd say it's probably the late 80s. I, like Dave Howell, was a DNR district wildlife biologist working with private landowners in southwest Indiana also. And I was wooed away to the Fish and Wildlife Service by Dave from the DNR in 1992. And I had the pleasure of working with him from 92 until he retired in 98, I think it was, so about 6 years or so. And, Bill was mentioning something earlier about Dave often doing things that were not considered the job responsibility of ecological services supervisor, whether it was, pursuing refuge establishment or meeting with the Secretary of the Army to do a deal for Big Oaks National Wildlife Refuge. That was how Dave looked at conservation. It wasn't this narrow, this is my job description, and this is what I'm going to do. It's how can I make things better? And so one of the things early on that Dave pushed for in my career was this program called the Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program, which was a habitat restoration program for private landowners. And so we've heard a lot about the refuges and the public lands in the state, but in a state like Indiana, 97% of the land is owned by private landowners. And so unless you work cooperatively and positively with private landowners, you're
only able to do part of the mission because they own most of the land. And so that's what the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program was really all about. And Dave was the driving force to get it started in Indiana. It was a fledgling program, mainly in the Midwest region at that time. Since expanded to the entire country, all states have a partners program now. And the key aspect, obviously it's in the name of the program, is partnerships. And one of the things I really learned from Dave is building partnerships. Tim Maloney talked about the groups, the conservation groups that might not see eye to eye on certain things, coming together and kind of focusing on a common goal. Dave had a name for that. He called it the 80%. And the premise was that those groups have 80% in common in terms of protecting natural resources, improving clean water, wildlife habitat. There's a lot of overlap there. And instead of focusing on the 20% that you disagree with, let's focus on the 80% that you have in common. And so that was the thing that he talked about. Let's get the 80%ers together because there's this issue that needs to be resolved, and we need numbers to make it happen. So that was kind of his thought process. Looking at this picture over here on the side here, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, the Garfield picture, but Jim Davis, the creator of Garfield, had a farm in northern Indiana, and he was one of the early folks that was a participant in the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program. At that time, it was actually called the Partners for Wildlife program, and the fish came later. But so Dave kind of leveraged that national recognition that Garfield had. You know, what about Garfield promoting wetland conservation? How would that play out? And what came out of that was this 1-800 number called 1-800-Cattails. And Garfield was the spokesperson for restoring wetlands on private lands. And we had this little fledgling office at the time over on North Walnut Street. We're on South Walker Street now, a much bigger office, but at the time it was just a kind of a small office with a few cubicles and half a dozen biologists and a couple of admin folks. And that 1-800 number was the number that came from our office. And it ended up being a national number. So our two admin people were getting calls from all over the country from people that wanted to restore wetlands, calling 1-800-Cattails. So we had to kind of shift that responsibility to some other people in the region. That was really cool. Dave, as been mentioned here before earlier, Dave had a sense of humor. And I remember one time we had an intern from IU that spent a few weeks during the summer helping us with the Partners program, doing some monitoring on projects and meeting with landowners and things like that. He also played football for IU. He was an offensive tackle. And he was 6'6", 325 pounds. Chris Linsky was his name. And Dave used to call him Tiny. And Dave was a big guy, but Chris just towered over Dave. And he ended up getting drafted by the Minnesota Vikings, but he always kept that nickname Tiny. So I'd like to close with a couple of prayers. Mary asked me to share a prayer or two, and the story that Molly told of the puppy, and that really struck me that, you know, Dave had that connection to the natural world, but also that recognition of the creators behind that. And these are some familiar blessings that you might have heard before, but I think they're appropriate for Dave's love of the natural world. One is a familiar Irish blessing, and it goes, may the road rise up to meet you, may the wind always be at your back, may the sun shine warm upon your face, the rains fall soft on your fields. Until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand.
The second is from the book of Numbers in the Bible. It says, "The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace." Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. That will conclude our speakers, unless anybody here wants to volunteer. But I think it's been a wonderful ceremony. And certainly everybody has to appreciate what we've lost when we lost Dave. One of a kind. But he's going to have a legacy, and that legacy is what we're all going to benefit from in the future.
Yeah.
Can I say something?
This is,
Yes,
this is
absolutely.
Dave.
Just stay up a minute. I'm Lance Hudak. I'm Uncle Dave's nephew. Everybody can hear me okay? You know, I'm listening to everyone speak about stuff I didn't even know about Uncle Dave. I didn't know any of this. And when I read the obituary, I'm like, I can't believe Uncle Dave did all this stuff. So one of the things I wanted to ask while the gentleman came up is the sense of humor. Because this guy, my uncle, always busted my chops. I mean, he was just, I'm going to tell you a story, and with a story that I remember as a kid. And, you know, time goes by so fast, like this. And you know, I'm listening to everybody speak, and, you know, I wonder to myself, do we really appreciate the value of time? So quick, flies by. We think about regrets, how come we didn't do this and do that. But it sounds like my Uncle Dave really gave everything. He really did. Like every day. It's hard to do. You know? Did he use words like dude? Stuff like that. He said, "What's up, dude?" You know, he was just always, he's a very competitive guy, too. Is he competitive? Does everybody think that? I mean, you know, Danny and I, my dad, his brother, we were a competitive family. Was he competitive? Everybody was speaking up here, was he? Was he competitive? Boy, he was competitive with us.
Why does he get things done?
He did, you know, and sports guy, talked about sports all the time. But there was this, just gotta tell you this story. So I think it was my father and my uncle against me and Dan and I. We were playing basketball. And they never wanted to lose, they wanted to beat us. So we were playing basketball at Dad's house. I don't know if you remember this, Matt.
Yeah, I
But
think,
it was Dan and I against my Uncle Dave. And Uncle Dave, because he was huge, just a big dude. And my dad was smaller. So he used to bump in like this, keep the ball here when the basket's there. So we were beating them, finally. We were beating our dads. So I had Uncle Dave, and my dad had Dan. And Uncle Dave, I'm backing in, last point of the game. My Uncle Dave pulls my pants down. All of it. Steals the ball, throws it in and scores. And I'm standing there. I can't believe this. The whole family's there. He had to beat us. I'll never forget that. So what did I do? I passed
that down to my son. You know what I mean? And that's what I think we do. You know, we pass everything down. Good stuff, bad stuff. You know, but I'm not gonna forget, I've saved 8 messages from him on my phone. Because you just don't know. And the way that guy, the way that it went down, I talked to him on Friday, day before. My brother saw him, my other brother talked to him that week. Think about this. It's perfect. Molly came in. Sunday, he had a big meal, right? Had his ice cream, he loved all that stuff, right, Aunt Mary?
Yes.
And then you know what he did? He had everything right there, right? He had everything. If I want to go, I want to go like that. Because we all think about that, don't we? How are we going to go? How are we going to go? What are we going to leave? You left that heck of a legacy, it sounds like to me. All that stuff was new. Everything was new to me. Right? Again, I keep looking at that obituary, beautiful. And I could not believe all those things that he never even told me about. He was humble. Which, I mean, obviously he's probably about 80 years older than me. You know what I mean? But, you know, I never knew all that stuff. And I love hearing everybody speak. I'm just sitting here like, wow, that's my Uncle Dave. Never knew that stuff. So I just wanted to thank you guys. You know, it's always fun to see things like this and everybody talking about it. Just an awesome guy. You know, so thank you very much.
That was good. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Did you want to say, are you okay?
I'm the sycamore land.
That's all right, did you want to say anything?
You're welcome. I don't want to follow
Okay, folks. I really, really love all of you. Thank you for coming. On the way out, grab a snack, grab a cookie, a bottle of water, and we also have food at my house. If you want to come by, grab a sandwich, visit, talk for a little bit. All of you, I know all of you pretty much know each other, but it's kind of nice you don't see each other often. So drop by. We got food, we got family, packets of seeds. Oh, and the seeds, packets of seeds, wildflower seeds. Thank you. Thank you.